Coming up on Theater Talk.
Even as late in the history as the 1920s, nobody knew or cared who directed these shows, and it didn't really matter. They were traffic managers. Then, as you get into the 1950s, we start to have director-choreographers in a big way. But now, all the choreographers want the promotion to be director-choreographers, and the musicals take on this wonderful life because a choreographer sees everything in motion.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post. So Susan, one of our favorite guests of all time is back with us today, Ethan Mordden, who has written... Ethan, I'm in the middle of writing one book, and I think at the time I finish my one book, you'll probably have cranked out another 3 or 4.
This is your 900th?
How many? Something like that.
900th book?
I lost count.
Yeah, right. And the book is called Anything Goes, A History of the American Musical Theater. Ethan is one of the foremost experts on the topic, and we're delighted that he's with us today on Theater Talk.
Thank you.
You have written several books about the musical theater. You've done decade by decade by decade.
Yes.
What is the purpose of this book? Just to give us an overview, or are you crystallizing your thinking?
No, I decided to give it a completely fresh look, push everything I've already written aside, start from the beginning, which is the Beggar's Opera, 1728,
right,
and go up to as far, last Thursday, more or less. Actually, it's Wicked, which is, but Bonnie and Clyde gets in there too, so it goes up to 2011. The idea was to take a fresh look and try to understand what is so basic and wonderful and marvelous about this, everyone says, basic American art form, and yet the intellectual and academic classes did not get to it until relatively recently. For the first 100 years, no one cared about it at all. It was just there. I guess it was regarded as a wonderful entertainment and nothing more. But now people, academics, are constantly taking a look and pulling aside the facade to see what the messages are.
What are the messages?
The best way I could explain it is I have a friend who is a photographer, and he recently took a cross-country trip, New York to California, by car, avoided all the big cities, just went to small towns, taking photographs. He got a book out of it, in fact, and it's called Follow Me. And he noticed that everywhere he went in the small towns, we think of it as an idyll, as life is simple, life is true. They thought of it as being trapped in a world that has absolutely no potential in it. And he said, this is interesting, he's a very charismatic guy. Everywhere he goes, everyone falls in love with him. All the girls said, please stay in our town. And all the boys said, please take me with you. It's an alternate universe that we didn't even know about. The musical is the opposite. In the musical, everyone is young and cute and can exercise his potential to the fullest. And the worst thing that happens is there's a Quaker aunt who doesn't approve. And by the end of Act 2, she's all ready to go along too. That's what the musical was. It really did suggest that there's something about American life that is fabulous and marvelous, but also does give you the chance to improve yourself and to find yourself and to do all kinds of marvelous things. And this was entirely within a boy-girl romance that no one really believed in, and yet there are boy-girl romances all over the place.
But did the musical do this more than other art forms?
Yes. Now, the movies did it too, but you add music in and it goes up to the highest power.
Right.
Music glorifies everything it touches. That's why in a musical, if you make a mistake and there's a song involved, the audience goes completely out of the show because the music emphasizes it. That's why, believe it or not, in My Fair Lady, when it was out of town before it came to New York, playing very, very well except for one part. There was a guy who was in love with a girl and he was singing this beautiful love song, and the audience just sat there night after night in Philadelphia. First New Haven, then Philadelphia. Night after night, Moss Hart, the director, said, cut it. Frederick Lowe, who composed this wonderful melody, said, cut it. Alan J. Lerner, who wrote the book and the lyrics, refused to give up. First, they fired the guy who was singing it, and they put his understudy in. By the way, the guy got back into his role later on when they found out what was wrong. What was wrong was this was after the ascot scene.
Yes.
All the men are in gray. All the women are in black and white, but each is in a different gown. The men are all in this regulation gray suit. So this guy turns up all by himself, and he starts singing his love song, and the audience is thinking, who on earth is that? Because he looks like everybody else in the ascot scene. And the lyrics did not tie him to his dialogue scene with Eliza when he became so enamored of her. So they're thinking, this guy is singing a love song. Why? Where did he come from? What's going on?
We don't even know who he is.
But he's Freddie Einsford Hill.
And he's singing On the Street Where You Live.
It's only one of the greatest.
Well, all they had
it was bombing.
All they had to do was write a new introduction, because the old one was just a plain old love song kind of thing.
I think it was Peter Stone who once said this to me, that writing a musical is sort of solving a series of problems.
Yes.
Which is just what you used to
exactly.
illustrate there.
And Moss Hart said every show makes you feel like an amateur, because it never occurred to them that when the lights came up on this guy, they thought, oh, he's going to sing a beautiful song, it's going to be our big hit, which it eventually was. They didn't remember that the audience would have no way of knowing who he was. And if he just had a few lines of dialogue and went off, it wouldn't hurt the show. But since he stood there for 3 minutes singing this song, expecting them to respond to it, they got really unhappy. The music emphasizes everything. It emphasizes what you do well, like The Rain in Spain,
right.
which is a beautiful way to show you that Liza and Higgins, not even knowing it themselves, are forming a bond. I know the third guy is in there too, kind of thing. But the point is, in dialogue, you can't do that. You need that
right.
funny tango going on, so, and the dance that they do, the bullfighting dance that they do after, to show how the chemistry is working between these two. And then, of course, that sets up I Could Have Danced All Night, which is, in effect, her love song. If everything, yes, it's a series of puzzles, and if they all fit together beautifully, you have My Fair Lady,
right.
and you're a millionaire.
Right.
But if things go wrong, like the famous Hello Dolly Out of Town in Detroit, they gave a big song at the end of Act 1 to Vandergelder. And at this point, the audience was, they understood who he was. He's the rich skinflint, she's going to get him at the end. We don't care about him now. And instead of giving you Dolly, everyone cared about,
right.
they gave you this guy. The song is fine.
What was the song?
I've Got a Penny, I think it's called.
Huh.
But the point is, the audience did not want to hear a song from him at that moment. And it threw the whole show off. It took them all the way through Act 2 to the title song before they responded again. And that's called flop. So you've got to fix that problem. It is a series of problems.
What is the song that ends Hello Dolly? What the song did they eventually put in there to solve that problem?
Oh, end of Act 1, Before the Parade Passes
Right,
By.
of course. Which is a big Dolly's statement of her life.
Exactly, and it's just what the audience needs. They need to know that she's still in the story, she's fighting for it, and she's the person they identify with and love. Whereas they got the skinflint guy, whom they enjoy. David Byrnes, always very funny, has very funny lines in that show, but it's not something that they need. And you add music to it, then it's got this, it goes up like this. And if it goes up correctly, terrific. If it goes up incorrectly, flop.
And that Penny song's pretty good. You can hear it on the CD extras.
It is a good song, but it has nothing to, so was On the Street Where You Live.
That's right.
And it was bombing.
Right.
You know what else was bombing? People in Funny Girl.
No,
But yes, they were going to cut it. Everyone wanted to cut it because the scene leading up to it, the ramp up in the dialogue, was not directed properly by Garson Kanin, who knows nothing about musicals. And the audience was very confused, and then suddenly she starts singing, and they're thinking, why? Now, you know, if you go back to the 1920s, audience didn't think, why?
Right.
They thought, oh, good, a song.
A song, right.
In any Ziegfeld show, for instance, the lights would come up on Ruth Etting in a daisy field. And she may have had a few lines of dialogue, maybe not, doesn't matter.
Right.
She's there and she sings 10 cents a dance.
Right.
The audience, or whatever, actually, the audience does not think, who is this woman? Why is she singing about 10 cents a dance? What does that have to do with this Eddie Cantor musical? They think, oh, good, Ruth Etting.
Yeah,
But
because they're not
once-
seeing a character, they're seeing a star.
Well, in those days, shows weren't
Integrated.
puzzled that way. They had room for instance, if someone said to Ziegfeld, you know, I saw this girl, Beth Berry, at the Brooklyn Paramount or whatever it was, and she does a bubble dance to die for. What's a bubble dance? It's a solid thing that looks like a bubble, and in diaphanous whatever, she dances around, throwing the bubble here, throwing the bubble there, throwing the bubble like this, turning around, it's the bubble. And Ziegfeld goes to the Brooklyn Paramount. He thinks, she's terrific. Goes backstage. He says, I'm Ziegfeld, and I will give you such and such a week. And he always paid more than anyone else did to do your bubble dance in my next musical. He didn't say to the writers, find a way to work the bubble dance into the story. He just, you know, one scene would end, and the Traveler would close, and on comes Beth Berry with her bubble dance. And people don't say, who on earth is this? Or what is a bubble? They think, oh, great, a bubble dance.
But they were at a variety show in a certain sense, and so much of your
to a
book,
limited extent.
so much of your book is about the switch from this variety show kind of thing, which was kind of director-less.
Yes, it was.
To the new style of musical where the director, you talk a lot about this, becomes the commander-in-chief.
Well, even as late in the history as the 1920s, nobody knew or cared who directed these shows, and it didn't really matter. They were traffic managers. As time goes on, the choreography becomes more and more important. In the 1930s, it starts. The dream ballets. People from the ballet world come in. Agnes Tamil, Charles Weidman, and so on. Balanchine. Then, as you get into the 1950s, we start to have director choreographers in a big way. There were a few before, but now all the choreographers want the promotion to be director choreographers, and the musicals take on this wonderful life because the choreographer sees everything in motion, and they move quickly. Gower Champion, for instance, his idea of a musical was 3 lines of dialogue leading to the next number, then another 3 lines of dialogue leading to the next number. His shows move
Narrative drive.
like nobody, absolutely. And so you cut the script down to fit his idea, which means you've got nothing but 3 great lines, then a great number, 3 great lines, then a great number, like that. And the director-choreographer became so important that at a certain point, if it's Jerome Robbins conceives, directs, choreographs, whatever, that's all you need. It doesn't matter who's in the show at that point.
What happened when Bob Fosse created the original Chicago? What was the change in the form?
Well, actually, there was even more of a change there because Bob Fosse is, credited as co-librettist with Fred Ebb. And in fact, on an earlier show, Sweet Charity, he set out to write the book himself. Now, it's credited now to Neil Simon.
Right.
But the fact is, they went into rehearsal with a Bob Fosse book. And he was smart enough to know that it wasn't good enough and it needed Neil Simon. And he called Neil Simon, and they'd worked together on Little Me, for instance. And Neil Simon did so much work that they had to share the credit first, and then it was just booked by Neil Simon. However, the first sheet music in those days always came out when a show was out of town, which is why so many songs that were cut were published at the time. And those first sheets say book by, is it?
Conceived by Bob Fosse.
Bob Lewis, L-E-W-I-S. His name was Robert Louis Fosse,
right.
L-O-U-I-S. In other words, at that point, Neil Simon wasn't even getting credit.
But Fosse was the captain of the ship as
Captain
never
of the ship,
before.
and Chicago was his conception.
Yes.
The whole thing is his. All he needs Fred Ebb to do is help him with the dialogue. The way Chicago looked, that the elevator that came up at the beginning, Cheetah Rivera comes out to start all that jazz, the way the chorus moved, the way they played different roles from time to time.
Just going back to this, I'm fascinated by the bubble dance thing. I think a lot of lousy shows I've seen that would have been improved by a bubble dance being dropped in the middle of it.
Well, every now and then with flops, they don't know what else to do, and they don't stick in a bubble dance because no one knows what that is
I'd
anymore.
rather a bubble dance than a dream ballet.
Well, but the point is, every now and then they just stick in stuff because they don't know what else.
Right.
If they knew about a bubble dance, they'd probably stick it in.
Is it true what we've always told, and maybe you have found a different perspective on this, and maybe there's a show we don't know about, but was it really Showboat that begins the integration of the musical and giving the musical more serious themes, or is there something before Showboat that has been forgotten?
Yes, there was something before Showboat, 1 year before, that has been forgotten, but also as far as integrated goes, the first musical is the Beggar's Opera in 1728. Yeah. It's completely integrated. Gilbert and Sullivan are completely integrated. Most of those Victor Herbert shows are completely integrated. There's no song that doesn't come jumping out of the story, kind of thing. No, Showboat didn't, but Showboat was the second show with serious themes. The first one, year before, 1926, was called Deep River. It also was set in the South. It also was about race relations. The book was by Lawrence, I'll just call him Candy Bar because I can't remember names now. But he was the co-author with Maxwell Anderson of What Price Glory.
Oh,
Lawrence Stallings. He was a real playwright, too. I've read the script upstairs in Lincoln Center Library, and it's a wonderful script because he's constantly making asides to the reader. He's explaining about how in the South, men, husbands, would impregnate their wives over and over and over again over the course of 40 years. And he said, that's why you would have an older brother who was 20 years older than you, and that's why my mother died at a young age. What does that have to do with the show? But he was explaining why he's putting things in. In any case, Deep River was much more serious than Showboat, in fact. Very tragic. People got killed like crazy in Deep River. They don't get killed a lot in Showboat.
Is it a good show, Deep River?
It's an interesting show. The trouble is the score isn't very good.
Who wrote the score?
It's the guy who wrote Beyond the Blue Horizon, and he has several different names, so let's call him Candy Bar. But it's a kind of operetta score, but it's a very serious.
But it didn't have Old Man River.
Also, the entire second act is a voodoo ceremony. Three-act musical.
With a bubble dance?
No bubble dance, but everything else but a bubble dance. And apparently, this is the word on Broadway, it was really shocking, and all through the second intermission, everyone was chattering about anything but the voodoo they just saw.
How are the reviews? Did you go back and look at the reviews?
No, I don't remember now. I did. I used to, when I was doing those decade books, I read everything from, and the library has everything on microfilm. Every critic, and there were plenty of daily papers in those days, and the Daily Worker and the Brooklyn Eagle, so you really got a chance to find out. And critics were great in those days because they thought it important to tell you what the show looked like and important events, and a feature that we now no longer have. They always picked out 3 or 4 numbers that they felt would be popular.
Tell us, go ahead from Showboat, which, Deep River, I grant you, is the first serious one, but Showboat is the one, the milestone.
Yes, it takes a hit to make a precedent.
Exactly.
You can't have a precedent with a flop.
What then happens, and how is the next milestone, Oklahoma, different from Showboat? How has Oklahoma refined the form from what Showboat was?
The main thing is, Showboat is a musical comedy that has partly an operetta score, and certain scenes are straight play. So it's this odd That's one of the reasons why it's such a rich show and why we never quite collect it, so it has to keep... The reason why they revive shows, I know, is because they think there's money in it.
Right.
But that's not the reason we go to revivals. We go to revivals because we haven't collected the show yet. I always say the reason why you can do Gypsy every 3 or 4 years is because it's so tightly written that a lot of details are simply left out. Now, I don't mean it's incomplete. It's not. But you have to kind of supply a lot of the backstory
But it has no
yourself.
fat, yeah.
No fat at all.
Right, no fat.
Every line works. So you're never going to collect it. It moves too fast. It's really a genius show in that sense.
But Showboat is hard to collect just because there's so much of different forms going on in it.
And you say it has vestiges of operetta. And what is the difference between an operetta and a musical?
A musical comedy.
A musical comedy.
Okay.
Well, then which then becomes a musical. Yeah.
Well, yes, we call them musicals now.
Now, because they're too serious.
Because we don't want to say, a new serious play and lots of people die and it's really horrible.
But there's a bubble dance.
No musical, because they're not musical comedies anymore. And actually, they really aren't. In the old days, even the serious shows, except for Deep River, but certainly Showboat, you could not open if you didn't have gags, jokes, fun.
Right.
No matter how serious you were, you go back to Oklahoma, there's a lot of fun in that show. Even Carousel, dark as dark can be, a lot of jokes, a lot of fun, a lot of humor, but
Next to normal?
not so much humor.
That needed a bubble dance.
The point is,
needed a bubble dance.
the point is, humor was such an intrinsic part of the musical for so long. It took a long time for us to lose humor. Another problem is I think directors nowadays don't want, they don't want actors putting gags over as gags have to be, which is a kind of gag. There's a gag tone that you use. It signals the audience that this is the gag line.
It's old-fashioned show.
Absolutely. They don't like that. They want everything organic and out of the character.
And yet our greatest performer on the stage is still Nathan Lane.
Yes, well, he
who
can
put across the gag.
Well, no director's going to close him down.
Yeah.
But I felt, for instance, in the South Pacific revival that everyone but me loved, that the Luther Billis, the performer is wonderful, Danny Burston. He can do anything he wants. But I can tell that the director wants him to play the character. Don't play the gags. But that role is written. It's made of gags.
Right.
The character is there, it's true. But it's a gag character. He's there to keep the fun going.
The comic.
Yes, exactly.
Now back to the difference between the musical and the opera.
Musical comedy is saucy fun.
Right.
Operetta is, you go to operetta for the voices.
Right.
You go to hear people who really can sing. If you hear recordings of people who started musical comedy in the 1910s and the 1920s, half the time they're talking their way through the whole show. You know, I have, believe it or not, a bootleg, although it's available commercially, of Ziegfeld Follies of 1934.
Oh, interesting.
Somebody took the whole thing down on 78s, and one label reissued it on a CD. And if you listen to it, and the sound is faint, but you can tell, most of them are just talking their way through the songs. And the reason why is, first of all, a lot of them couldn't sing.
Right.
Second of all, a lot of them could sort of sing, but without mics into those big theaters, to project, you have to shout.
Right.
Even during a song. Operetta was different. Operetta, they had people singing operetta who could have gone into opera, but chose the lighter stage.
So in operetta, the songs are carrying the book, but in the musical, the book is carrying
the songs. Yes, exactly. Because now, once you get out of the theater, you're never going to hear the songs the way they were supposed to be heard in the first place. You can hear the people singing them on radio, once radio gets going. You can play them at home on the piano and so on, but you have to hear them the way they should be in the theater. And the odd thing is, in musical comedy, a lot of times you didn't get the tune because people were projecting the songs rather than singing the songs. Of course, now it's not a problem because they're all mic'd.
Right. Back to Oklahoma.
So, Oklahoma, what is different from Oklahoma from Showboat? How does the form refine to that?
Well, as I say, Showboat is an amalgam of forms.
Right.
It's got musical comedy characters doing musical comedy things. It also has serious people. It has Old Man River, the biggest song ever written kind of thing. Oklahoma is much more organic and much more homogenized. The whole thing flows together. If you saw a Showboat in 1927, you would see many things that nowadays would be unforgivable. For instance, a scene change and someone comes out to do a dance. No, not a bubble dance, but the next thing to it, a comic dance. And all right, he's a member of the cast. It's Frank, in fact, Frank and Ellie of the Showboat.
Right, right.
And supposedly he's performing, you know, the afterpiece of the, but it doesn't really connect to the story. There are a number of things like that. There's the famous scene where, just before that, the two backwoodsmen break up the performance because they think the villain really is a villain. And they pull out their gun and they chase him off the stage. And the audience has to hear how the show ended. So Captain Andy then performs all the roles and finishes off the play.
Yes, I remember that.
And it's a great moment for an old-fashioned comic because he pulls out all his shtick.
Right.
But when someone like John McMartin does it, John McMartin is an actor. He's not a comic. He doesn't work with shtick. He works with reality. And he doesn't know what to do because the scene is not written real. It's written shtick. That kind of thing. And Oklahoma doesn't have anything like that. Actually, Oklahoma has one little piece of old-fashioned stuff, and that's the peddler character.
Right, that's
now,
right.
no longer. Now we see just guys playing the peddler. But originally it was Joseph Bulloff out of the Jewish Theater from Second Avenue. He was specialized actually in accent roles, because I've seen him play, you know, for instance, Mexicans in Hollywood movies and so on. And Rogers knew him from one movie. They met in Argentina. There, he plays a South American. But Joseph Bulloff played it with an accent, and it was kind of like the Sancho Panza in Man of La Mancha, who also played his role with. And Ali Hakim is supposed to be Persian, but here's this guy who's really from the shtetl kind of thing. And that's a piece of Oklahoma that doesn't quite fit with the, you know, the fabulous new minted reinvent the musical Oklahoma that we know. And another, by the way, mistake that everyone has about Oklahoma, everyone says this, even the Dowager Empress Rogers, before she died, told me this. This famous thing about in Oklahoma, everyone said no gags, no gals, no chance, because the women are all dressed in, you know, frontier, blah, blah, blah. You know, everyone forgets that in the Dream Ballet, Judd's wicked postcards come to life. Oh, right. 3 dancers, and they're wearing very little. They're wearing what you would wear on a naughty postcard in 1910. So yeah, their skin in Oklahoma
Which is
too.
sort of what they were wearing in the Black Crook.
Yes, well actually no, in the Black Crook, they were covered, but they were form-fitting covers.
And we should say that the Black Crook is said to be the first musical, but you say it is not.
It is not the
Beggar's
first anything,
Operettas.
and it is not a musical at all. Actually, one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book was to get to the Black Crook, because every musical history, Black Crook is 1866, it's the famous first musical, ballet company merges with a melodrama company, and no one ever explains what that musical was like, and I decided, okay, this is my crusade. I'm going to go into the archives, I'm going to find out, I'm going to get the script, I'm going to get the score, and I'm going to tell you what it was like to be at the Black Crook. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to do this book.
Was the Black Crook any good, in your estimation?
It's hard to say, because most of it was ballet and melodramatic acting, like, methinks I see the villain in yon garb, or that kind of thing.
I'll say the Black Crook was a smash.
The Black Crook had a phenomenally long run. In those days, hit shows, you have to remember, they didn't just play New York. They played the road. New York was just a stop, really.
Right.
It was the prestigious stop, but it was just a stop. A show could run for 2 years on the road, do 2 weeks in New York, and obviously it made money. The Black Crook ran for over a year in New York, in a big theater, 1,800 people.
We do have to wrap it up, but I want to know, you've gone through the history of the musical theater. Can you give me, having looked at these shows again in a fresh way, can you give me a show that you think has been unjustly neglected and is underrated, and a show that you think maybe is a little overrated?
Carolina Change, I think, is overrated.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
I think its only content is leftist race mania, quite frankly. There's nothing else in it. Underrated, that would be 100 shows. I love flop musicals, and I think they're The Gay Life.
The Gay, yeah, right.
That was really a wonderful show, so beautifully done. I was going to counter with another question. Every time I do a show about the musical, someone always says, if you could go back in time and see any show you wanted, what would it be? And every time I've always blown it. Instead of, see, what you should do is give the prestigious answer. Here's an example. The Cradle Will Rock. The federal government padlocks the theater, considering the show too incendiary. Right. They march 20 blocks up Broadway and perform it themselves in the, I guess it was called the Venice Theater at that point. It was originally Jolson's 59th Street. Right. And the Actors Equity has forbidden its performers to play on any alternate stage, but it didn't stop them from getting up in their seats and performing the show. Mark Blitzstein, the author of the show, is on stage at the upright. He was going to do the whole thing himself if he had to, but the cast then performed in the auditorium. Abe Fetter, the lighting designer, has one spotlight that he moves around. Very exciting, very prestigious, and it's political too. Yeah. I don't want to go back to that.
So what would you go back to?
I'd still want to go to Funny Girl with Barbra Streisand. I mean, I saw it, but I want to see it again, because I got into opera at that point, and I was neglecting the theater. And that was such a great performance. That really, really was. It's
not a great show, though, is it?
I think it is. Well, maybe not a great show. I think it's a wonderful show. Let's put it that way.
Seriously, that's the last time.
It has second act trouble. So, Michael, what do you think?
Well, no, I was just going to say, because I remember your wonderful book that I just read to do some research for the book I'm writing about Broadway musicals in the 60s. You say that this is sort of the epitome of the big lady show.
Yes.
Barbra Streisand in Funny Girl.
Yeah, well, actually, the big lady show is really more Hello, Dolly or Mame. That's where the whole show really, it's not just a star vehicle. The whole thing is aimed at the star, so that on the curtain call, Carol Channing and Dolly comes out in a completely new outfit, and the whole cast is serenading her with the title song. That's a big lady
That's
show.
a big thing. Now, what would you have seen?
If you could see any show in the past, what would it be?
If I could see any
musical.
Show. A musical, right.
I know my answer. I'll let you think.
Yeah, well,
my answer is I would like to see Ethel Merman's first Broadway appearance in Girl Crazy, 1930, singing I've Got Rhythm.
That would be exciting.
I think I would like, I think it would be a Gershwin show, and I think maybe Of Thee I Sing.
That's a great show.
Yeah, I mean,
No
I
one-
just know the score, but
But we both won
but
Gershwin
it had
shows,
some
yeah.
wonderful actors in it. You know, the cast was first rate.
Yes, but you know what? I actually, as long as we're doing Gershwin, you know what would be exciting is to go back to Porgy and Bess, especially its world premiere in Boston. That was supposed to be the most exciting night in the history of the musical. People who were there say, we were so keyed up, and the music was so fabulous, and the cast was great, and the thing just bounded off the stage into our hearts.
We could go on and on and on with Ethan Mordden.
Send
author
us,
of this
email us and send us the
fantastic-
shows you'd like to go.
Yes,
that you'd
we're
like
going to
to
put
see.
it up there. Tell us what show, what year, any time, any period would you
You
like
go
to
back
see.
in the past and see it.
Here's the book. It's wonderful.
Anything Goes, History of American Musical Theater by our good friend Ethan Mordden. Congratulations on yet another fine book, Ethan, and I'm sure we'll have you back next week when you have another new book to talk about, right?
I'll be there.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
You can sign up for viewer updates at theatertalk.org.
Or you can follow us on Twitter. Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.